Gaara was already halfway back to the fortress when Naruto caught up with him on the ridge path. Desert wind pushed thin lines of sand across the stone. Naruto asked whether Gaara truly wanted to return to Sunagakure and stand over the machine that had spent years turning Shukaku's chakra into a village resource. Gaara kept walking. That was exactly why he was going back. Reports could be edited, and orders could be explained. He wanted to see the reservoir himself. Kurama muttered that this sounded like an excellent way to ruin the rest of the week. Sand rippled near Gaara's gourd. After listening to Shukaku, Gaara informed Naruto that the One-Tail considered Kurama an old idiot. Naruto asked why he had bothered passing that along. Gaara said Shukaku had insisted. Naruto decided Kurama did not need to hear the answer. By the time they reached the fortress doors, Kurama was already demanding to know what had been said. Kakashi was waiting inside, beside the communication table. The report to Hiruzen had already entered Konoha's relay chain before sunset, exactly as he had promised at the end of the meeting. Until an answer came back, nobody from Konoha was crossing deeper into Wind Country. Naruto accepted that without argument. A month earlier, almost any restriction placed around him would have felt like a cage. He understood the distinction now. A village telling him what could be done to his body was one thing. A mission commander refusing to walk a Jinchuriki into another great village without authorization was ordinary responsibility. The reply could not arrive before morning, so the fortress settled into another night of preparation. Kurenai used that time to solve the one problem her departure would create. The sleep protocol had worked, because Gaara could be pulled back toward his own awareness through 3 simple sensations. Cold stone beneath his hand, the pressure of the gourd strap against his shoulder, the soft scrape of sand moving across the floor. During the first trials, Kurenai had kept those sensations stable with a light genjutsu structure, while Shukaku's chakra distorted everything else. She did not want Gaara depending on her presence every time he slept. That evening, she brought him back to the repaired sealing chamber and changed the exercise. The stone, the strap, and the moving sand were all real sensations that belonged to Gaara's own body and environment. Kurenai showed Gaara a basic release rhythm that required almost no chakra, a small pattern he could repeat before allowing himself to sleep. The purpose was not to create an illusion. It was to train his mind to mark those 3 sensations as the route back to his body. Gaara disliked the idea of practicing sleep while people watched him. He did it anyway. Chiyo checked his pulse and chakra pathways. The Sand Seal Master confirmed that the accumulator branch remained isolated. Naruto sat outside the primary circle, with Kurama ready to respond if Shukaku pushed too hard. Gaara pressed his palm to the floor. He felt the strap. A narrow line of sand crossed the stone in a steady rhythm. His eyes closed. The first few minutes were tense enough that Baki never shifted his weight from the wall. The sand near the gourd lifted 2 inches, then settled. Kurenai did not reinforce the anchor for him. Gaara found it himself. 20 minutes later, Naruto touched his shoulder. Gaara woke in his own body, turned his head toward the gourd, and checked the room with the same hard reflex he had shown during the first successful trial. His breathing slowed after 2 seconds. Kurenai asked him what had brought him back. Gaara answered in order, naming the cold stone, the strap, and the sound of sand. Kurenai accepted the result. She told Baki and Chiyo that the protocol could continue without her physically maintaining the anchor. They would still need outside monitoring, but the return route now belonged to Gaara instead of the genjutsu specialist standing over him. Naruto liked that change more than he said aloud. The answer from Konoha arrived after sunrise. Hiruzen approved the continuation of the mission. Naruto, Jiraiya, and Kakashi could enter Sunagakure as an official Konoha delegation. Kakashi remained the mission commander and had authority to end Konoha's participation if Sand violated the agreement. Gaara would return with Baki, Chiyo, and the current Sand Seal Master. Kurenai was ordered back to Konoha with copies of the temporary sleep protocol, her mental evaluation of Gaara, and the full report on the hidden accumulator. the restrictions were explicit. Sand would not open Naruto's seal, store Kurama's chakra, attach Naruto to the desert reservoir as a power source, or place any new control formula on him. Any new intervention involving Gaara's primary seal had to be disclosed to the Konoha team during the joint investigation. Those restrictions had not all been part of Rasa's original invitation. Kakashi sent them back through the same relay chain before the group moved. Rasa's countersigned acceptance arrived with Hiruzen's authorization, extending the fortress restrictions into Sunagakure itself. There was also a second message, sealed for Kakashi and Jiraiya. Hiruzen had kept the investigation into the masked shinobi active since Naruto revealed the truth of the Nine Tails attack. Anbu had found no man, no confirmed base, and no reliable identity. Several old reports did support one conclusion. Witness descriptions around the night of the attack were consistent with an unknown space-time technique. Jiraiya read the line twice. Naruto had expected the information to hit harder. Instead, it settled beside 1,000 years of older anger and stayed there. The man existed and had once controlled Kurama, but that was all Naruto could act on today. The desert reservoir was in front of him. The masked man was not. Kurenai left for Fire Country before noon, with a sealed document case strapped beneath her cloak. Naruto walked her to the outer barrier. She reminded him that he still owed her a proper attempt at modern counter-genjutsu when he came back. Naruto told her he had not forgotten. Kurenai said that was exactly what worried her. Someone who remembered mistakes for centuries was probably unbearable to teach. Kurama approved of her assessment. Naruto ignored both of them. The sand group departed an hour later. The first part of the route still followed hard ground, but the stones slowly gave way to deeper sand. Naruto adjusted his stride after the first mile, using less downward force and allowing his foot to roll forward instead of driving straight into the loose surface. Kurama began complaining before lunch. Naruto reminded him that the sand was not touching him. The fox insisted he could hear every grain trapped inside Naruto's sandals. Naruto stopped responding. Gaara walked near the front with Baki. His feet barely seemed to sink. The sand supported him in tiny unconscious adjustments that made the desert look easier than it was. 2 hours later, Gaara slowed enough to walk beside Naruto. Shukaku, apparently unable to tolerate silence, had noticed Naruto's technique and found it inadequate. Gaara passed along the advice in the same flat tone he used for everything else. Naruto was shifting his weight too late on the rear foot and wasting energy every time the surface collapsed under his heel. Naruto stared at him. Gaara stared back. Naruto pointed out that taking desert walking advice from someone whose sand adjusted itself under every step was not a fair comparison. Gaara considered that for a moment. The corner of his mouth moved by so little that Naruto might have imagined it. Shukaku had no sympathy. By evening, Naruto's stride was better anyway. The changes in Gaara were harder to notice, unless someone knew what to look for. He still had the same dark rings around his eyes. His skin remained pale. He still stood slightly apart from everyone at camp. Yet, he no longer snapped his head toward every sound after closing his eyes for a few seconds. His sand did not rise every time Jiraiya walked too close. When the group stopped beneath a rock shelf for the night, Gaara sat with his back against stone and let his eyelids close while Baki was still moving around the camp. He did not fall asleep. He simply rested there for almost a minute. Naruto noticed, and Baki did too. Neither of them said anything. Jiraiya used the second day to question Naruto about First Veil. He did not ask how to control Kurama. After the fortress, even he seemed to understand that the wrong question produced useless answers. He wanted to know what the cloak did to Naruto's real body. Naruto explained that the form was already easier to stabilize than it had been during the fight with Root. His muscles no longer fought the first layer of Kurama's chakra. Tendons and joints remained the true limit. 1,000 internal years had taught him exactly how to move. His actual skeleton had only lived 12. Jiraiya approved of the restraint. Naruto mentioned that Kurama had called the same restraint cowardice for several centuries. Jiraiya looked toward Gaara, then toward the endless desert, and decided he did not want the full context. Kurama called him a coward too. Near sunset on the second day, the cliffs around Sunagakure appeared through the heat haze. The village entrance was cut into enormous stone walls that turned the surrounding desert into a natural fortress. Patrols occupied the heights. Wind moved through the narrow approach, hard enough to tug at Naruto's white collar and flatten Jiraiya's long hair against his back. Rasa had kept the visit quiet, but secrecy had limits. The guards at the entrance saw Gaara returning with the Konoha delegation. They also saw the blonde 12-year-old with a leaf forehead protector walking beside him. Naruto felt a tension follow him all the way through the gate. No one challenged him because every shinobi on the wall understood who carried the 9 tails. Naruto kept Kurama's chakra completely inside the seal and walked at Kakashi's pace. The first people waiting inside the administrative district were not council members. Tamari stood beside a broad doorway with her folded war fan strapped across her back. Kankuro was next to her, one hand resting on the case that held his puppet equipment. Both of them looked at Gaara before they looked at anyone else. Tamari's eyes narrowed slightly. She was checking his posture, his hands, the sand around his feet, every sign that might tell her what mood he had brought home. Kankuro stood farther away than he needed to. Baki gave them the shortest possible explanation. Gaara had completed several controlled sleep sessions. The longest had lasted hours. Kankuro's hand slipped from the edge of his puppet case. One wooden section dropped several inches before he caught it and lowered it to the ground. He immediately adjusted the straps, as if that had always been the plan. Gaara watched him. Kankuro concentrated very hard on a buckle. Jiraiya laughed openly. Kakashi found something fascinating on the opposite wall. Naruto decided that Kankuro deserved the chance to survive the moment without assistance. Tamari recovered first. She asked Baki if Gaara had really slept and woken without Shukaku taking control. Baki confirmed it. Her gaze moved from Gaara to Naruto, then to Chio and the Seal Master. She did not smile. She stepped aside from the doorway. For the first time since Naruto met him, Gaara walked past his siblings without either of them preparing for violence. The meeting with Rasa began less than an hour later. The 4th Kazekage received them in a formal chamber above the administrative complex. Sunlight entered through narrow stone openings high in the wall. Maps, sealed records, and 3 locked archive cases had already been placed on the long table. Rasa did not waste time pretending the desert reservoir had restarted without his knowledge. The authorization seal was his. Years earlier, after another dangerous incident involving Gaara, the senior military council had reviewed what would happen if Sand lost control of Shukaku during an invasion. A dead Jinchuriki could mean years without access to the One Tail. A full release inside Sunagakure could destroy entire districts before a sealing team responded. The old Desert Reservoir project had offered a third option. Dangerous excess chakra could be collected, stabilized, and redirected into emergency barriers or evacuation seals. Rasa had approved a limited restoration. He had been told the receiver would remain passive until Gaara returned to the village and physically connected through the Gord network. The field buffer was supposed to collect only emergency overflow. It was not supposed to open aggressively during sleep, and it was not supposed to increase pressure on Gaara's primary seal. Naruto listened without interrupting. Rasa's explanation made military sense. That did not make the decision harmless. Chio opened the first archive case. The current Sand Seal Master laid the modern reference sheets beside older diagrams. Jiraiya took one end of the table. Naruto stood between them and followed the logic rather than the writing. He could understand the function of a seal far faster by feeling it than by reading an unfamiliar sand notation system. But the written history still belonged to the people who built it. The missing piece appeared in an intermediate restoration report. The senior seal officer who had overseen the project had reused a wartime emergency governor from the original design. It was efficient, stable, and built for an era when Sand expected surprise attacks from enemy Jinchuriki. It also had a brutal definition of emergency. A major spike in Shukaku pressure meant danger. It did not care why the pressure increased. The old governor had been linked to the primary seal feedback lines so it could react before a complete release. That decision created the loop Naruto had felt at the fortress. Gaara began to fall asleep. His active resistance weakened. Shukaku pushed harder. The gourd buffer interpreted the rising pressure as an emergency and began drawing chakra. Shukaku felt his chakra being taken and pushed harder still. The buffer responded by opening wider. The system had been worsening the very condition it was supposed to control. The current Seal Master found the report that should have stopped the project. One test had shown unexpected feedback between the field buffer and Gaara's primary seal. The officer recommended a full live review before long-term use. The full review never happened, and the document still carried Rasa's approval for continued limited operation. He had been preparing for a border crisis at the time. The restoration team was intentionally small because the project was classified. Rasa had judged the warning acceptable compared with losing the village's Jinchuriki during war. The senior officer died months later on another mission. The people maintaining the gourd received only the simplified field diagrams. The full governor remained buried beneath the Kazekage complex, technically functioning and largely forgotten. Rasa could not place all of the blame on a dead subordinate. The paper in front of them made that impossible. Gaara had been silent through the explanation. He stood near the end of the table with his gourd still strapped to his back, hands hanging loose at his sides. When the documents were finished, he asked his father why no one had told him that his body was connected to a military storage system. Rasa answered that the Jinchuriki of sand had always been part of the village's defense. Gaara's expression did not change. He said that was not an answer. The room became very still. Naruto did not rescue Rasa from the silence. This was not his argument. Rasa looked at the restoration report again. The explanation he finally gave was shorter. He had believed control of the system belonged to the Kazekage and the SEAL teams. He had not considered Gaara's agreement necessary. Gaara absorbed that without visible surprise. He had spent his entire life being treated according to exactly that assumption. Naruto asked the practical question: could the village defense network remain active if the involuntary extraction branch was removed? Rasa turned to the current Seal Master. The man could not answer from the documents alone. The only complete map of the receiver existed in the chamber below. Rasa ordered the lower archives opened. He did not send a subordinate to escort them. He went himself. The route into the desert reservoir began behind two sealed stone doors beneath the administrative complex. The first descended into a military bunker built before several of the current surface buildings. The air changed quickly. Dry desert heat gave way to cool stone and the faint metallic smell of old ink compounds. Naruto had expected complexity. He had not expected elegance. The system was old, but it was not crude. Thick conduits had been carved directly into the walls. Sealing marks followed them in carefully repeated blocks. Narrow maintenance tunnels branched towards support chambers, emergency vents, and old barrier junctions beneath the village. There were no glowing machines or impossible laboratories. The entire structure was stone, ink, metal plates, prepared minerals, and chakra logic refined by generations of SEAL specialists. The central receiver chamber was circular and several stories high. A broad stone cradle occupied the floor where Gaara's gourd could be connected to the network. Around it sat 4 storage chambers sealed behind heavy doors. A ring of vertical conduits climbed toward the barrier system above. Naruto placed 2 fingers against the nearest wall and used Seal Echo. A tiny pulse entered the first line. The answer came back in layers. The receiver accepted chakra from the gourd only after a physical connection. That confirmed the distance rule they had already established. The stored chakra moved into separate stabilization chambers. A third branch connected those chambers to the old emergency barrier network above Sunagakure. Destroying the reservoir would not simply erase stolen chakra. It could cripple defenses built into the foundations of the village. Kurama felt the old energy before Naruto reached the storage doors. Shukaku felt it through Gaara at almost the same moment. The sand around Gaara's sandals rose sharply and struck the stone with a dry hiss. The stored chakra was old. It had been taken during earlier connections, training accidents, and emergency tests. It was not a second consciousness. Naruto could feel that immediately. There was no mind in the chambers, only a huge reserve carrying the rough pressure and texture of Shukaku's chakra. That distinction did not make Shukaku less furious. Gaara's jaw tightened as he listened to the one tale inside him. Baki moved half a step closer, then stopped himself when the sand did not attack anyone. Naruto continued the examination. The barrier branch was clean. The storage branch was stable. The extraction path was tangled around the old governor, exactly as the archive suggested. Then, Seal Echo returned something else. A narrow side route answered with a rhythm that did not match the sand system. The response lasted less than a second. Naruto sent another pulse and received no answer. Jiraiya examined the stone where Naruto pointed. The visible marks were old maintenance lines that had been deactivated years earlier. Chiyo confirmed the same thing. The current Seal Master found no active route on his diagrams. Naruto could not identify the source through the receiver's background pressure. Jiraiya and the Sand Seal Master refused to leave an unknown route open before activating a military system beneath the village. They boxed the visible maintenance marks behind a temporary isolation ring, fed 3 weak test pulses through the surrounding receiver lines, and inspected the stone conduit behind them. Nothing answered. No active chakra route connected the side branch to the receiver, and the strange rhythm did not behave like current traveling through an ordinary seal formula. They marked the location, kept the isolation ring in place, and assigned a sand guard to the access junction. Naruto memorized the rhythm anyway. Whatever had answered Seal Echo appeared dormant under low load, but he had no reason to assume dormant meant harmless. At the far side of the chamber, Jiraiya and Chiyo began arguing over one of the original governor diagrams. Jiraiya insisted the branching line clearly ran toward the upper containment ring. Chiyo asked why the stabilization notes were written upside down if that was true. Jiraiya stared at the page. The line now ran toward the lower reservoir, exactly as Chiyo had said. Kakashi slowly shifted his attention to an empty section of wall. Naruto decided that if he somehow survived another 1,000 years, he intended to preserve this memory with perfect clarity. Jiraiya caught the look on his face and told him to forget whatever he was thinking. Naruto said that request was probably several centuries too late. By the end of the examination, they had a plan. The extraction route could be separated from the barrier network, but only while the hidden governor was fully active. In its dormant state, several command lines overlapped and could not be cut safely. They would need to connect Gaara's gourd at minimum output. Let the receiver expose the complete governor, isolate the extraction branch, and close it permanently while preserving the storage and barrier layers. Gaara had to participate directly. Rasa looked toward him. This time he did not issue an order. He explained the risk and asked whether Gaara agreed. Gaara looked at the receiver cradle, then at the sealed storage chambers holding Shukaku's chakra. Gaara agreed, and the procedure was scheduled for the following day. The team refused to rush the preparation. The evacuation zone above the bunker was expanded. Administrative offices directly over the oldest supports were cleared. Sand engineers reinforced 2 weak tunnel sections. A medical team waited at the upper stairwell rather than crowding the receiver chamber. Jiraiya and Chiyo prepared independent cutoff seals. The current seal master rebuilt the connection cradle from fresh tags instead of trusting the oldest activation marks. An abandoned desert vent west of the village was reopened as a pressure route. The shaft had once been designed to dump excess barrier energy into an empty ravine. Jiraiya personally confirmed that no homes or active tunnels stood beyond the old plug wall. Kakashi mapped every exit and assigned the evacuation order. Rasa's emergency authority was also written down before anyone touched the receiver. He could begin full suppression of Gaara if Chiyo confirmed that the primary seal was actually failing or Gaara lost control of his body. A fallback clause covered the one situation in which Chiyo's direct reading became unusable. If receiver interference blinded her monitoring seals, while two independent emergency systems both showed imminent release, Rasa could act without waiting for a clean reading. One set of pressure indicators by itself was not enough. Naruto insisted that the fallback condition be written just as narrowly. Rasa signed it. Jiraiya then insisted on one more test before anyone connected Gaara. Naruto let a trace of Kurama's chakra touch the dormant outer sensing ring while the central governor remained closed. The Sand Seal Master repeated the test at two separate nodes. Nothing reacted. The foreign chakra did not wake the receiver, alter the gourd cradle, or disturb the storage layer. They recorded the result, instead of treating it as proof that no deeper response existed. The dormant system had not revealed every wartime branch in the archives. And Naruto agreed not to feed Kurama's chakra into the active network unless the extraction line became unreadable by other means. Gaara slept that night, using Kurenai's self-return routine. He woke before sunrise, ate with Chiyo watching closely, and spent the next hour doing absolutely nothing that involved his seal. Naruto approved. The failed fortress trial had taught them what happened when exhausted people attempted delicate work because the schedule looked convenient. By mid-morning, everyone was in position. Gaara stood at the center of the receiver chamber, with the enormous gourd removed from his back. The current seal master lowered it carefully into the stone cradle. Broad straps remained loose enough that Gaara could feel one across his shoulder if he needed his return anchor. Naruto stood several paces to his left. Kakashi waited near the access corridor. Jiraiya and Chiyo knelt at opposite sections of the governor ring. Rasa remained beside the emergency control seal, with Baki farther back. The Sandmaster looked to Gaara first. Gaara gave permission. Only then did the connection open. At first, the receiver behaved exactly as the diagrams predicted. A thin stream of Shukaku's chakra moved from the gourd into the first stabilization line. The old seals brightened one after another instead of all at once. Naruto touched the floor and followed the response through seal echo. The governor opened in layers. Jiraiya found the modern control branch. Chiyo identified the older wartime loop beneath it. The current Sandmaster began marking the points where the extraction route could be separated once the full command line exposed itself. Gaara remained steady. Shukaku hated the connection, but he was participating because Gaara had agreed to the test, which kept the pressure around the primary seal rising slowly instead of violently. Naruto tried to read the deepest line with his own chakra twice. The active governor smeared both returning pulses together until the extraction branch and the old containment layer felt almost identical. Cutting either one on that reading would have been a guess. The dormant test with Kurama had shown no reaction, but the governor was fully open now, and Naruto needed a denser reference pulse to separate the two functions. He asked Kurama for the smallest stabilizing pulse that could do the job. Kurama sent exactly enough. The red-orange chakra never reached the air around Naruto. It moved through his internal pathways, steadied the seal echo pulse, and touched the receiver through Naruto's hand. The old bunker changed immediately. A sharp vibration ran through the floor. The governor stopped opening as black sealing lines appeared between the older sand marks and raced around the circular chamber. Naruto withdrew his hand, but the reaction had already spread. The receiver had detected another source of Biju-class chakra inside the protected zone. It did not identify Kurama by name. It did not need to. The wartime system knew one-tailed beast was authorized. It had now found a second massive signature touching the same network. Containment protocol activated. Stone doors slammed shut along the outer corridor. The vertical conduits leading toward the village barriers sealed themselves. A heavy inward pressure struck Naruto's stomach as the bunker tried to lock Kurama deeper inside the seal. At the same time, the receiver widened the route connected to Gaara's gourd. Gaara bent at the waist. Sand exploded from the cradle and struck the floor around him. Naruto recognized the logic before anyone could shout instructions. The system had classified Kurama as an invading tailed beast and Gaara as the local containment asset. It was trying to suppress the foreign source, while pulling more chakra from Shukaku to reinforce its defenses. A crude solution would have been easy. Naruto could feel the load-bearing wall to his right. First veil and one committed strike would tear open the chamber. Another could destroy the central receiver. He could also feel the weight of the administrative complex above them. He stayed where he was. His first broken current struck the nearest command node. Naruto waited through 2 complete pulses, read the rhythm, and inserted a counterpulse between them. The black line on the floor went dark. For less than a second, a redundant route on the wall took over, and the suppression returned. The brief failure gave Naruto useful information. He was dealing with a redundant network, built to survive damage, rather than a single technique. Naruto changed approach, and formed the ordinary Academy clone seal. Illusionary Narutos appeared around the receiver chamber, until dozens of false bodies surrounded the old sensing network. Mirage Legion created no independent bodies, and could not hold a door or strike an enemy, but physical force was not what Naruto needed from it. The first containment pulse had left a weak Kurama identification imprint inside the wartime sensing layer. Naruto caught that returning pattern through seal echo, and split only the residual identification key across hair-thin filaments connected to his illusion clones. The clones did not imitate Kurama's massive power. They reproduced the exact foreign resonance the military sensor had been ordered to verify. Containment nodes began switching targets, because the old failsafe could not ignore a matching enemy key simply because the signal was weak. One locked onto an illusion near the eastern wall. Another shifted toward a Naruto, standing beside an empty storage door. 3 more divided their pressure across false bodies, moving in different patterns around the chamber. The receiver had been designed to find and verify one foreign Jinchuriki signature. Naruto forced it to waste time authenticating dozens of copies of the same identification pattern. The pressure on Naruto dropped enough for Jiraiya to see something change in the governor. He called out the lower command route. Chio confirmed it from the opposite side. The Sand Seal Master marked the exposed branch. Then Gaara's side of the chamber worsened. The receiver pulled hard enough to drag sand from the mouth of the gourd in a continuous stream. Gaara planted one hand on the cradle. Dark markings began to spread faintly over one side of his face. Above Rasa's emergency station, 3 indicators turned red. Baki shifted toward Gaara. Rasa raised one hand over the suppression control, but the written protocol stopped him from completing the seal immediately. Chio was already watching Gaara rather than the indicators. His pulse was high, and his chakra pathways were under heavy strain. The problem was that receiver feedback had begun saturating the monitoring tags around his primary seal. Chio could still see that Gaara's eyes and movements belonged to him, but she could no longer certify the condition of the deepest seal layer from her instruments. Shukaku was furious, but Gaara was still controlling the body. Gaara lifted his other hand. The sand changed direction. Instead of lashing outward at the people in the chamber, it drove into the open extraction conduits along the floor. Shukaku added chakra willingly. The result was violent and precise. Dense sand packed into the narrow channels and jammed the physical pathways that were pulling power toward the governor. For the first time, Gaara and Shukaku were using the same system against the machine built to control them. Pressure inside the reservoir climbed. The red indicators above Rasa's station doubled in brightness. A second independent emergency ring activated and reported the same rapid takeover risk. The receiver could no longer distinguish resistance from possession, but Rasa did not yet know that. With Chio's deepest reading blinded and both emergency systems agreeing, the narrow fallback clause had been met. Rasa made his decision and started the suppression sequence. Gold dust burst from a sealed trench around his station and rose in a dense wall between him and Gaara. Naruto looked through the active flows with seal echo. The pattern was wrong. Gaara's primary seal was still holding. The dangerous pressure was traveling from the reservoir back toward him. If Rasa crushed Shukaku's output now, the receiver would interpret the sudden spike and loss of flow as catastrophic instability. The extraction governor would open fully to compensate. Naruto told Rasa to stop. Rasa continued the sequence. From his position, the official indicators showed the exact condition the emergency procedure had been written to prevent. He would not gamble the village on Naruto's interpretation alone. That was a decision Naruto understood. It was also the wrong one. The gold dust wall moved to block him. Naruto used 1000 pulse step. The first microburst hit his foot. The second stabilized the ankle. A third reached the knee and hip at the exact instant he drove forward. Rasa's gold dust reacted quickly enough to close the path. Naruto had expected that, and touched the moving edge with 2 fingers as he passed. Broken current interrupted the controlling rhythm for less than a heartbeat. The gold did not vanish. It was still real metal, suspended in the air. The wall simply failed to close one narrow section in time. Naruto crossed through it, and a second 1000-pulse step put him beside Rasa before the Kazekage could finish the next hand position. Naruto caught his wrist, completing the entire exchange in only a few seconds. He had not used Kurama's cloak. His breathing had not changed. There was no reason to pretend. Rasa could match 1,000 years of close-range experience once Naruto reached him. Naruto kept the exchange controlled and turned Rasa's arm slightly, and forced the Kazekage to look past the gold dust. Gaara was still standing, and his sand was still obeying his choices. Shukaku's chakra was moving into the blocked conduits by agreement, not tearing through Gaara's body. Chiyo shouted that the primary seal remained intact. Rasa's gaze stayed on his son for one long second. Then he released the suppression seal himself. The gold dust fell away from the emergency control. Naruto let go of his wrist and was back beside Gaara before most of the dust reached the floor. The choice came just in time. The blocked conduits had already forced too much pressure into the lower storage ring. One of the old doors cracked down the center. Stored Shukaku chakra burst through the gap. The energy had no mind. It could not speak and did not recognize anyone in the room. It carried the shape of the beast it had once belonged to, the way water remembered the channel that guided it. A huge sand-colored claw formed from the first surge and smashed into a support column. Part of a tanuki head rose behind it, featureless for a moment before dark markings spread across the surface. Gaara flinched at the sight. Shukaku's real voice raged inside him. Naruto could feel the difference clearly. The thing coming out of the reservoir was pressure wearing Shukaku's outline. The one tail himself was still inside Gaara. A support beam above Jiraiya split. Naruto opened first veil. Red-orange chakra wrapped tightly around his body in one clean motion. The form no longer fought him at activation. His joints took the load smoothly. A chakra arm shot upward and caught the falling support before it crushed the governor ring. Naruto kept both of his real hands free. The stored chakra construct turned toward the vertical conduits leading up into Sunagakure. If it reached those lines, it would dump pressure directly beneath the administrative district. Jiraiya pointed toward the western wall. The old desert vent lay beyond it. Engineers had reopened the outer shaft, but the original stone plug separating it from the receiver chamber remained in place. The wall was safe to break. Naruto crossed the chamber. He planted one foot, drew chakra through first veil into his shoulder, and struck the center of the marked stone plug once. The impact cracked the wall in a circle wider than Naruto was tall. The entire plug blew outward into the empty shaft. Cool desert air rushed into the bunker. Kakashi looked at the hole, then at Naruto. Naruto was already moving again. The stored pressure reached the first upward conduit. 9-folded Aegis appeared in smaller sections instead of one enormous shield. Naruto set the first plane across the mouth of the conduit at a shallow angle. It did not stop the surge. It changed the direction slightly. A second layer turned it farther. A third sent the leading edge toward the newly opened vent. More layers appeared along the chamber in a staggered path. The technique had once redirected one huge attack away from a fortress. Now, Naruto used the same principle like a system of invisible channels, bending several dangerous flows a few degrees at a time until all of them pointed toward empty desert. The pressure hit the vent. Far outside the village, the ravine erupted in a towering column of sand and red-brown chakra. No building stood over the release point. Kakashi moved into the outer corridor as soon as Naruto cleared the pressure route. The containment protocol had sealed 3 mechanical locks above the chamber. Naruto identified which metal bars were not carrying active sealing load. Kakashi cut those with lightning and reopened the evacuation path for the engineers stationed higher in the bunker. Baki moved with him to clear the upper junction. Inside the chamber, Mirage Legion continued drawing sensing nodes away from the real Naruto, but the Governor branch remained behind the main flow of stored chakra. Jiraiya could see the command line now. He still could not reach it. Every route to the branch crossed the pressure pouring from the cracked storage chamber. Chio understood the same problem. They did not need more force. They needed the chakra itself to move another way. Naruto looked at Gaara. There was only one source in the chamber that the old energy naturally belonged to. He asked whether Shukaku could take some of it back. Gaara's expression hardened as the answer arrived. Shukaku refused at first, because the One-Tail had no intention of pulling his own stolen chakra through another sand system and trusting the people who had built it. Naruto did not make a speech about trust. He pointed out what would happen if the reservoir continued climbing toward failure. Rasa would have to seal the entire stored mass into another emergency container before it destroyed part of the village. Shukaku hated that answer more. Gaara's eyes narrowed as the argument inside him continued. Then he placed both hands on the gourd cradle. Sand spread around his feet in a controlled ring. Shukaku agreed to take back only a small amount. Shio warned that Gaara's body could not safely accept years of stored chakra at once. Naruto already understood the limit. The return had to be slow enough that Shukaku absorbed it inside the seal instead of flooding Gaara's pathways. The current Sandmaster reversed the smallest available receiver channel. This time he did not activate it until Gaara gave permission. The stored chakra hesitated at the branch. Gaara became the bridge by choice. A narrow current moved from the reservoir through the gourd and into him. Shukaku caught it on the other side. The effect on the chamber was immediate. Pressure dropped along the cracked storage ring. The huge claw lost part of its shape. More importantly, the flow covering the Governor branch shifted away for several seconds. Jiraiya saw the opening. He called the exact command line. Chio confirmed which older branch could be fixed without damaging the barrier network. The Sand Master placed one hand on the physical cutoff plate. Naruto read the command pulse through Seal Echo. The command pulse was stable now. Naruto watched 2 complete beats, then inserted broken current between them. The extraction command lost synchronization. The Sand Master tore the physical link free. Chio drove 2 prepared tags across the old branch before the redundant line could reopen it. Jiraiya completed the neutral seal over both. The Governor tried once to reroute. No redundant branch answered. Naruto sent one more Seal Echo pulse through the network. The storage chamber responded. The barrier network responded. The extraction route stayed dead. He checked again from a second point. The route remained dead. Gaara's gourd remained connected, but the receiver could no longer pull chakra from it automatically. The desert reservoir had lost its access to Gaara. Naruto let Mirage Legion disappear. The pressure construct collapsed with it as the remaining stored chakra settled back behind the stabilization seals. The giant head dissolved into heavy streams of sand. The claw broke apart across the floor. First veil remained around Naruto until Jiraiya confirmed the last support was stable. Then the red-orange chakra withdrew. Naruto rolled one shoulder and tested both knees. His muscles were tired, but there was no tearing and no sharp tendon pain. His real body was learning. Rasa looked at the hole Naruto had punched through the old vent wall, then at the intact ceiling over the village. The distinction was difficult to miss. Naruto could have destroyed the chamber. He had chosen exactly what to break. The repairs lasted through the afternoon. Nobody tried to restart the extraction system. There was nothing left to restart. Jiraiya and Chio inspected the sealed branch independently. The current Sandmaster Remove the old Activision hardware from the gourd cradle. Naruto checked the route 3 more times with seal echo from different walls. The result did not change. The reservoir could still store what was already inside it. The emergency barrier network could still draw from those chambers if given a legal command. What it could no longer do was reach through Gaara's gourd and take more. That left the question of the chakra already stored beneath Sunagakure. Rasa's first instinct was to preserve it as a military reserve. The amount remaining could power barrier sections during an invasion, or buy time during an evacuation. From the perspective of a Kazekage, discarding that resource made little sense. Shukaku's perspective was simpler, because the stored power was his chakra. Gaara listened to the argument inside himself, and repeated the point without softening it. The energy had been taken through a system he had never agreed to use. Sand could call it a reserve. Shukaku considered it stolen. Naruto stayed out of the center of the discussion. He had learned in Konoha that winning someone the right to speak meant very little if he immediately used that right for them. Chio provided the practical answer. Returning the entire reserve at once would be reckless. Even if Shukaku could absorb it, Gaara's pathways still had to carry the transfer. Small, controlled amounts could be returned over time through the receiver under direct monitoring. If Gaara or Shukaku refused a session, the chakra would remain sealed and unused. Rasa looked at the old storage doors for a long time. Then he ordered the legal seals brought down. The new directive was narrow enough to be enforceable. The desert reservoir would not reconnect automatically to Gaara. It would collect no new chakra from him. Stored Shukaku chakra could not be spent through the village barrier network without Gaara's recorded agreement and a voluntary response from Shukaku, confirmed by 2 seal specialists. Any future modification to Gaara's primary seal required his informed consent. If Gaara was unconscious and an immediate threat to civilians, made delay impossible. 2 senior medical or sealing specialists had to confirm the emergency whenever circumstances allowed. The reason had to be recorded as soon as the danger passed, and the exception could not be used for training, discipline, planned enhancement, or routine containment. Rasa signed first. Gaara read the document line by line. Naruto recognized that habit. Gaara checked the Kazekage seal at the bottom and folded his copy into an inner pocket. Rasa began to say something else. Gaara had already turned toward the stairs. Rasa stopped with the words unfinished. Gaara kept one hand near the inner pocket, holding his signed copy as he climbed. And the distance between father and son remained several steps, all the way to the upper level. One order had changed what sand could legally do to Gaara. It had not changed what Gaara remembered. That evening, Gaara used the sleep protocol inside Sunagakure for the first time. The sealing room was smaller than the fortress chamber and better equipped. Chio and the Sandmaster monitored the primary seal. Gaara placed one palm on cool stone, felt the gourd strap against his shoulder, and let a thin trail of sand move beside him in a steady scrape. Kurenai was hundreds of miles away. Gaara's self-return anchor held through the entire session. Tamari remained against the far wall. She had brought her fan, but left it folded. Kankuro sat near the doorway with his puppet case beside him, positioned as if he might leave at any moment. Gaara noticed both of them before closing his eyes. He slept for 2 hours. When he woke, the sand around the room stayed low. The next morning, Kankuro found Naruto outside the administrative building, while Naruto was checking the soreness in his calves from the reservoir fight. Kankuro asked a question he had apparently spent some time deciding whether to ask. Did Shukaku always talk that much? Naruto considered the safest possible answer and said Kurama had exactly the same complaint about Shukaku. Gaara, who was walking past with Tamari, stopped long enough to hear whatever came next inside his seal. His expression became slightly flatter. He told Kankuro that asking for the rest of the conversation would be a mistake. Kankuro accepted the warning immediately. Naruto thought that was probably the smartest thing anyone had done all morning. By the next morning, the extraction route had remained silent through a full sleep cycle. Gaara's gourd had transferred nothing into the reservoir. The receiver logs showed no new chakra entering storage, and the emergency barrier network remained functional. That was enough to close the joint investigation into involuntary extraction. Before the Konoha delegation could prepare to leave, Naruto returned underground with Jiraiya and the current Sandmaster for one final closeout inspection. The receiver chamber felt completely different now. Most emergency lines were dark. The storage seals gave off a slow, regular pressure, and the extraction route remained dead. One part of the system was deliberately still live. The calibration plate had not yet been sealed into the archive, because the Sandmaster needed it to compare the receiver's final readings with the restored barrier network. Once the closeout was complete, he intended to remove it correctly and burn the active parent key. The foreign response Naruto had noticed during the first examination should have disappeared with the background noise, but it remained. Naruto placed 2 fingers against the same wall and sent a narrow seal echo pulse into the dead maintenance branch. He followed it into a side tunnel, barely wide enough for 2 people. Jiraiya checked the visible sand formulas as they moved. All of them were inactive. The strange response sat beneath them like a foreign thread laid across older cloth. At the first maintenance chamber, Naruto stopped beside an old paper tag that had lifted slightly from the rear wall. A small, unfamiliar mark had been hidden beneath it. The design predated the recent reservoir activation and had no connection to the desert reservoir formula. Most of its chakra had faded, but the remaining pattern was active enough for Jiraiya to recognize that it had been energized recently. The Sandmaster had never seen it. The explanation that fit the evidence was simple. Someone had found this old military complex well before the reservoir crisis and left a passive spatial marker inside it. The mark had not created the reservoir problem or changed Gaara's seal. It had waited for a large enough chakra event to wake it. The simultaneous presence of Shukaku and Kurama during the containment failure had provided exactly that event. The residue around the mark also showed that it had quieted again as receiver pressure fell to maintenance levels, giving whoever placed it a reason to wait until the bunker was calmer before entering. The marker had signaled someone. Naruto felt a fresh distortion farther down the maintenance route. He moved before Jiraiya finished turning his head. 1,000 pulse step compressed the distance into a blur. The tunnel opened into the calibration junction connected to the main receiver. A man in a dark cloak stood beside the open service housing. An orange spiral mask hid his face, leaving only one eye visible. The calibration plate was already in his hand, and the torn mounting contacts behind him still carried the last live maintenance pulse. The Sandmaster reached the junction behind Jiraiya and immediately recognized what had been taken. Because the receiver closeout was not finished, the plate still contained the full calibration record from the day's activation. Naruto did not ask the masked man's name. Naruto attacked immediately, and the first strike would have dropped an ordinary jonin before the man understood Naruto had moved. Naruto crossed the junction and drove a fist directly through the masked man's chest. There was no impact, no substitution smoke, and no displaced body. Naruto's arm passed through him, as if the man in the tunnel occupied different layers of the world. Naruto withdrew immediately and did not waste a second attack on the same assumption. Kurama's voice came low inside the seal. The chakra was the same. Kurama was certain it was the same man and the same presence from the night Kushina's seal had broken. The same person who had forced Kurama's eyes to obey a Sharingan and turned him against Konoha. For a moment, Naruto felt the 1,000 internal years behind him contract into one hard point of anger. The memories of Minato, Kushina, and Kurama chained to another man's will, all pressed into that single moment. He kept his breathing steady. The masked man shifted his weight. Naruto watched the chakra around him instead of the mask. He tried broken current once. A probing pulse touched the edge of the distortion. There was no stable rhythm to interrupt. The man's relationship with the space around his body changed too quickly, sliding between states before Naruto could find a repeating control cycle. Naruto abandoned that approach after one failed test. The masked man moved toward him. One gloved hand reached for Naruto's shoulder. Kurama felt the change first. The foreign chakra condensed, and the reaching hand became physically present. Naruto understood the first rule. The man could ignore an attack, while intangible. He could not grab Naruto from that state. Naruto allowed the hand to come closer. The masked man's fingers were inches from his jacket. Naruto shifted his weight. The instant the foreign chakra locked into the physical world, Naruto turned. His left hand closed around the man's wrist. His right fist drove toward the ribs. The masked man reacted fast enough to phase again before the punch landed cleanly. Naruto's fingers lost the wrist. They kept a strip of dark sleeve cloth. Both men separated immediately after the failed strike. The masked man looked at the torn edge of his cloak. Naruto looked at the fabric in his hand. 2 exchanges had been enough to expose the first rule. The masked man understood that too. He did not attempt a third grab. His body slipped backward into the wall beside the old emergency conduit. Naruto moved at once. Thousand Pulse Step carried him across the junction before the torn edge of the cloak had finished settling. His hand caught another fold of fabric, but the masked man's arm and shoulder passed through solid stone. Naruto did not drive a blind punch through the wall. Seal Echo had already shown him that the section carried both structural load and live maintenance lines. A physical click sounded inside the recessed service cavity on the far side. The masked man had chosen the one place where he could become solid, while stone and active conduits separated him from Naruto. He pressed the stolen calibration plate into the emergency socket from inside the cavity. Naruto sent a broken current pulse toward the buried command line as soon as he felt the contact. The parent key authenticated a fraction of a second before the counterpulse arrived. Jiraiya entered the junction behind Naruto as the false command split into the damaged maintenance network. The masked man withdrew the plate and vanished into his own space before Naruto could safely tear open the load-bearing wall. There was no open portal to follow. The body simply twisted out of the physical layer and disappeared with the plate. The bunker reacted a moment later. The stolen plate had been ripped from the receiver during an active cycle. Its key still carried authority inside the damaged maintenance network. Plugging it into the emergency socket sent a false failure command through several branches at once. The floor dropped beneath one support farther back. A second support cracked near the main receiver chamber. An old pressure line reopened beside the storage ring. Stone began collapsing toward the corridor where Chio, Gaara, and several sand engineers were still finishing repairs. Naruto could not solve that with Mirage Legion. His clones had no hands. He could not jump after the masked man. There was nowhere visible to jump. He opened first veil while already moving. A chakra arm shot backward through the junction and caught the first falling beam. Naruto crossed the tunnel, planted a 9-fold Aegis layer against the reopened pressure line, and turned the escaping stored chakra toward the western vent they had opened earlier. Jiraiya reached the maintenance socket and tore out the false command plate connection, but the collapse had already spread to 3 physical supports. Naruto used another chakra arm to hold the second. The third was too far away. Gaara's sand reached it first. The support stopped inches above the engineers. Shukaku's chakra reinforced the sand from inside Gaara without taking his body. Naruto saw the opening and drove through the debris with Thousand Pulse Step. He caught the cracked stone base, shifted the load toward an intact wall, and held it long enough for sand engineers to brace the support. Kakashi arrived from the upper stairwell with evacuation teams and began clearing people out of the damaged level. The crisis lasted less than 2 minutes. It felt longer because every second required a different answer. When the last pressure line closed, Naruto released first veil and looked back toward the empty junction. The masked man was gone with the plate. Naruto had kept the collapse from killing anyone, and the 2 exchanges had left him with the man's chakra residue, a piece of his cloak, and the first working rule of the space-time defense. For the first time since Kurama told him the truth centuries ago, the person responsible for the night of his birth was no longer a story. He was an enemy Naruto had touched. Once the immediate collapse was contained, the Sandmaster explained exactly what the stolen calibration plate held. During the procedure, it had recorded how the receiver separated Gaara's chakra from Shukaku's, how Gaara's primary seal reacted to external pressure, and how the current connection between host and beast changed when suppression activated. Naruto's seal echo and Kurama's stabilizing pulse had added a second modern Biju relationship to the same record. Jiraiya understood the danger. The plate could not hand someone control of Kurama or Shukaku by itself. In the hands of a person who already understood tailed beast domination, however, the data could be used to build a tailored interference pattern. For a few seconds, it might disrupt the voluntary synchronization between host and beast, interrupt chakra support, or create an opening for outside mental control. A few seconds was enough to matter, when the thief had already controlled Kurama once. The damage level was sealed off, while the engineers stabilized the remaining supports. Kakashi sent an emergency report toward Konoha through San's fastest relay route. The message was deliberately short. The masked shinobi from the Nine Tails attack had been confirmed alive. He had obtained current resonance data for Kurama and Shukaku. Naruto had made direct contact. Rasa read the copy before it left Sunagakure. The theft had happened beneath his own administrative complex. The masked man had entered a classified military chamber, taken data from Shukaku, and used San's emergency network to cover his escape. Whatever the man's larger purpose was, this was no longer only Konoha's old problem. Rasa turned to Gaara and began to state that he would join the response. He stopped halfway through the order. The pause was small enough that almost anyone outside the room would have missed it. Rasa asked instead whether Gaara wanted to participate. Gaara looked down at the gourd beside him. Shukaku's answer came before his own. The stolen plate carried information about both of them. Neither wanted it left in the masked man's hands. Gaara agreed, and no one mistook the decision for forgiveness. Jiraiya returned to the maintenance chamber with the current Sand Seal Master. The space-time residue on the wall was already fading, and Jiraiya made no claim that he could track the technique itself. The calibration plate was different. It had been ripped from a receiver that was still in live maintenance closeout before the parent key could be burned. A thin resonance connection, therefore still tied it to the desert reservoir. The masked man then used the plate inside an emergency socket while the network was damaged, reinforcing that unfinished link instead of closing it. The key was still answering. The remaining connection was barely strong enough to detect. The Sand Seal Master estimated that it would survive one more complete transition into the physical world. After that, the plate would finish recalibrating, the old key would burn out, or the masked man would notice the connection and destroy it himself. Jiraiya could work with that. He was not following space. He was following a known sealing component that still believed it belonged to a receiver under Sunagakure. They moved back into the damaged tunnel. Naruto stood beside the cracked wall, with a strip of dark cloth folded once in his palm. Gaara waited several steps away, with his gourd secured across his back. Kakashi watched the passage leading upward, while Rasa and Baki remained behind the sealed safety line. Jiraiya drew a temporary tracking formula around the surviving receiver key. The first response was too weak to read. Jiraiya adjusted one mark in the temporary tracking formula. The Sand Seal Master changed the angle of the parent resonance line. A narrow thread of chakra appeared across the stone. Its light was pale blue-white, cold against the dark tunnel. The line trembled once, then turned toward one side of the chamber. Kurama told Naruto that the masked man already knew his materialization timing had been exposed. The next encounter would not repeat the same mistake. Naruto expected that, and had no intention of repeating his own first attack either. Jiraiya looked at the tracking line, and pointed out the advantage the masked man did not yet know about. The stolen plate was still talking to the receiver. The advantage would last only until the resonance key burned out. Naruto closed his hand around the torn cloth. The blue-white line steadied against the stone. Somewhere beyond Sunagakure, the calibration plate had returned to the physical world. Their one chance to follow it had just begun.